Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Politatine Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ray Hennessy, and today we're joined with our producer, Miles Moorfield.
Good morning, Ray.
Today, we're going to be talking about a conversation that we had earlier this week, actually for this podcast. But for various reasons, it didn't quite meet our quality and expectations, and we want to talk about that. What happened?
We got really mad at each other and started yelling about politics while on video for about a good 15 minutes of our life was dedicated to arguing.
And not even good, like, constructive argument. No.
Oh, no, it was like the two talking heads on Fox and MSNBC like came together and were like, please talk about your political opinions now and prove how the other person's wrong.
It was pretty bad. So to give the context, we originally were creating an episode to talk about Senate races, particularly the closer ones. And when we got to the Texas Senate race, which I think was our first one, actually.
It was. We, in fact, did not actually make it to a single other race.
We derailed hard because we started moralizing the candidates and inserting a lot of our own opinions on the races, and then attacking the parties. And then as a result of that, we came to the defense of our own parties, and it just became a your party versus my party conversation.
So what I'm hearing is it's all Ted Cruz's fault. Is that what we're getting at? No, that's actually
some things never
problem
change
with that, guys. That's the whole thing. That's how easy it is to fall into like these traps.
No, it's true. And you know, the point of this podcast is to have like genuine, real conversations. And we're people who are genuinely passionate about these things. He was very passionate about the race, very passionate about Ted Cruz and Allred. Good and bad, you know. And for good reason. There's a lot that both candidates have done, which would indicate, you know, a favorable or very distasteful view of them. And it's just very hard when we have these conversations. We try to be very honest and truthful and have like a really nice conversation, but then we get these passions in the way, and then it's very easy, I think, to fall into like bipartisan talking points. Because I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. We stand pretty differently when it comes to a lot of political issues. And we're great friends outside of this podcast, even parties, but we're great friends. But when it comes to politics, there's a lot to disagree on.
We don't get along and agree on pretty much anything in terms of politics. Like, I think at the end of the day, if you look at me and Ray, we're about as opposed as one can be within the matrix given to us. You know, and also me and Ray, it's not like this is in isolation. These aren't just our opinions. We're constantly watching news media. We're constantly looking at the way that the media is shaping politics, and that in effect shapes the way that we talk to each other. I saw it on that, you know. We were saying the exact same points, you know.
Yeah, unfortunately, at some points it did just seem like it felt like, listening back on it, I was watching when Fox News gets the one token like liberal to talk so they can like try to pounce on it, or vice versa, that like MSNBC tries to get like that one like Republican representative to be like, you know, prove that the Republicans are dumbasses. And I don't, it's the question becomes, especially this podcast, the whole point of it, trying to have like a real genuine conversation without it just devolving, is how do we achieve these real conversations and kind of go beyond what's been presented to us by, I think, a lot of the media and what we see nowadays.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing when it comes to that is you don't have to change somebody's mind every time you talk to them. I think people who think it's like this zero-sum game, you know, that you can't inch slowly towards progress, that you can't slowly change people's mind, I think that's incredibly misrepresented of what is actually true. You know what I mean? Of how real humans function on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, you know, they don't change their minds in a second or over debate. It's over a long period of time. And it's not necessarily when we talk or have a conversation. It's not about always persuading. It's about at least seeing the other person's point of view. It's about seeing to what extent could I agree with them? Where does it maybe go too far? Where does it maybe not go far enough? But it's and that's the hard part. Because I would say we disagree about a lot. But I think that there's actually a lot we do agree with, but it's just the conclusions at the end of the day that we disagree with. But it's like that 80% that we agree with, that 20% is all we focus on, and it's all we hyper analyze. And that's where I think for most Americans, that's all we talk about, and then we completely forget the rest of the 80% that we're on the same page about. But the other side, when we talk about stuff we agree with, that's just boring. You know?
It is. Something has to be said to keeping people's attention through like anger, fear, resentment. We see it in our politics now from both sides of the aisle, claim that the other party is using rhetoric and stuff that's purposely demeaning and insightful of hatred and stuff. And I think it's frankly scary, and it's also sad the way that our politics have progressed to a point away from genuine conversations on like the unique individual person by person basis. Because of course the talking heads are gonna argue, but me and you on a discourse podcast arguing, like that says something about where we are.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes like we are reflections of our media. We are reflections of the society. And I think right now, such a bipolarized, or such a polarized society, it really gets into the grain of who we are. When we were having this conversation earlier this week, I think there was a couple things that we did, like specifically, I think it'd be good if we reflected over it, to kind of show what are some of the tricks that some partisans do that we, to be quite honest, did to try to maintain power. Because I'll be honest with you, at some point in that debate, or not, see, I'm calling it a debate. It's not a debate. It was a conversation. But that's how it felt. That's how it really felt at the end. At some point of our conversation, it wasn't even like I was trying to persuade you or anything. I was just trying to prove you wrong. And that's not really a healthy way of thinking about it, because I'm just going to go, no, that's wrong, no, that's wrong. And then here's we didn't even agree on the facts of what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think we specifically said I guess we're operating from different planes of facts, which is crazy. Why would those words ever leave my mouth when talking to a real human and not writing a paper?
No, right. It's like we couldn't even agree on X, Y, and Z. So then how could we debate about A, B, C at that point? And I think that's all, where the debate or conversation really derailed, when it was just well, you can believe that, but these are the facts. Well, there's no conversation at that point. That's just, we were talking past each other, and we were just throwing shit at the wall and being like, look at it, suck it, loser.
Yeah, if you mind talking about it, we a decent bit of our conversation was dedicated to book bannings. This is an issue that every American has heard about. Everybody has an opinion on it. Even if you don't have an opinion, somebody with an opinion thinks that's an opinion, And we were talking about it, and at the end of the day, we didn't agree, There is fundamental differences and issues in that case. But at the same time, yeah, I agree we should screen our books to make sure they're appropriate for school-age children. Do we disagree on what's appropriate, what's not, and what age? Of course. But that's totally fine. But, I didn't have the fortitude to say that to you, and you didn't have the fortitude. We had to get our other producer or executive at the Ox Institute to basically be like, yo, Miles, you think there should be some differences here, dude. You can't let all books be in. And I was like, okay, yeah. But the fact that a third party had to come up to me and be like, dude, you're crazy right now. You're talking crazy. There has to be some form of restrictions. I was like, oh, yeah, wow, I'm an idiot.
No, I agree. This thing we both did. It's when it becomes a verbal blood fight, we will actually go to the extremes and try to defend the extremes, and we're not willing to give up anything. And then, like you said, we sound crazy. We sound absolutely crazy. And I admit, we did sound really stupid in that guy. And to be honest, I think we started advocating for views we didn't even really believe in, but because it was the party
100%.
line view.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with a lot of the party politics of today, where if you really want to get somewhere in politics, you have to just start towing that line. Your own personal nuance out the window, doesn't matter. Doesn't make good conversation.
Well, look at Twitter, man. Everything's a freaking bloodbath on that app. Talk about discourse. Talk about Elon's public square. Public square my ass.
I genuinely believe if you're a political commentator on Twitter, there's something something not right.
I love it, dude, because like my following page is all like liberal people, you know, because that's like who I actually care about. And then the recommended page is all like Elon Musk boosted stuff, you know, like Dark MAGA rises, the end of America. And it's like, I'm like, oh my God. I'm living in a polarized world.
Cower in fear of the great red wave coming in 10 days.
Dude.
Seethe
Yeah.
and cope, liberal.
Yeah. And then, of course, it's like a Ted Cruz campaign ad, like, Texas risks going woke. Donate $10 now. That's the other thing. I think I was so triggered by the Ted Cruz conversation because I always see his face on Twitter. I don't want to see his face anymore. Like, it's not appealing. I don't want to see it. That's how I want to live my life.
That's fair. That's really fair. You know, but and then this is the worst part. Talking about the Ted Cruz, like advertisement you see. What was the advertisement? It said, what was it? Like something like, don't let Texas go blue, don't let Texas go woke. Why isn't there like just, he could have just said, here are some of the policies that All Red supports. I think they're problematic. You know, like why just the throwing out woke bad. We got to save the war, replenish the war chest.
Literally, I think literally replenish the war chest was used.
Because I've seen them.
This.
I've seen them too.
Oh. Awful. Awful content.
They're also just really cringy ads. To be straight up, they're really cringy.
You know, I was over at the fraternity house the other day, and I saw this ad for Larry Hogan supporting PAC, you know, and it was an effective character attack on who's running against him in the Senate seat.
Ooh, is it like Angie something?
Yeah, or Angela. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But, and it basically was like, she's a slumlord, like, this is terrible. She, like, only, like, brings, like, tax write-offs for herself. And I was like, wow, exactly 0 policies were discussed in here. This was a pure character attack ad. But, kind of like, you know, those photos of the apartment were pretty bad, you know. If she was renting that out illegally as claimed in the advert, I would be a little concerned, you know. But that's the thing, like, are so devolved. We're like back to the most like basic primal to talk about like the greatest society, you know, civilization, America, woo. This is how we actually talk about problems, you know. Like, I struggle to think of one business leader who actually has conversations the way politicians on ads, like one successful person.
What do you mean by that?
Like the way these people structure and frame stuff for convincing people is not how actual other leaders in the corporate sphere convince people. You will never see like a CEO at a company just like fear tacticking people to like support like a stock buyback program. Like, no, they just use actual logic.
The CEO of like Coca-Cola just absolutely roasting the shit out of the CEO of Pepsi.
Exactly. It's idiotic.
But, you know, I think this gets into a lot of, you know, well, one kind of mass democracy and its consequences, where a lot of people don't have enough time to really do their own research and look into the candidates. And so what's their quick way to try to get a point across these politicians? It's just like, this is a bad person. This is a, whether or not you know, this is a slumlord. This is a wokey liberal. This is a, you know, like reactionary, wants to bring back handmaidens, that, you know, and it's just like, it's the cheat code. It's a cheat code of politics.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, people just listen to it because, you know, we're talking because we're interested about this stuff. You're listening because you're interested about this stuff. How many people do you know really just don't care? They'll just vote the way that their parents did, or vote the way that their friends do, or they'll just be like, "Oh, I heard this. I don't like that. That's scary." So it works. It works for a large segment of the population, unfortunately. And I think the only way to really fix that is by having like conversations with your friends on a very casual basis like this, where you can inform, we can test and push things. I mean, the biggest thing you would ask somebody is like, "Oh, person is this? Why? What gives you that notion? Oh, you saw on a billboard? You have any more proof?"
No, yeah, I think that whole idea goes back to actually a concept that we studied last year, you know, this idea of like social citizenship and like our government trying to actively persuade people into taking a more active role in their political life, you know? And I think fundamentally that starts on like the discourse level. You know, you have to make it where people are willing to engage in these areas without feeling like they're gonna A, get canceled, yelled at, B, like they're gonna not be taken like value, you know, like a good faith argument. You know, I would say me and you have good faith conversations. That conversation
Most of the time,
last week was not good faith.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think when we talk about like the duties of an American citizen, like you said, it's more than just voting. Your duty as an American citizen is more than just vote or go to jury duty. It's actively participating in the system and being an aware member of society. And if you can't be an aware member, at least you're a conversational member of society. You're within the conversation. You're within the scope of things. Because I don't think you're doing. I think you do a disservice to the republic if you don't listen to the other side. You don't do anything. All you do is just go every 4 years and you like vote down the line. Like, you can vote down the line. I don't care. But at least know what you're voting for, really. Rather than saying, oh, this is a Republican. He's my guy. Oh, this is a Democrat. He's my guy. Or she. Inclusivity. But
Wow.
But I think there are a few common fallacies that people use when we're talking about the other side. And I think one that really annoys me is when people will speak and they'll state their view, and then they'll take the person listening. For example, I'm a conservative. I'll make a conservative talking point, and then someone will go, yeah, but what about this representative who's like really this far about it, this so extreme about it? And I'm like, well, listen, there's going to be some extreme guy, but I don't think the extremes of like a few representatives or a group of people disqualifies my argument as a whole, if that makes sense. But it's really hard because the stigma of like a few really distasteful figures, which even I could agree were distasteful, they end up murking the entire argument. And now it feels like the only way to really make my point across is having to defend these guys, which I don't even agree with how far they're taking my argument, really. So because of that, I think that kind of pushes the extremes when we go infinite to, you know, we throw away the nuance and we go, okay, that's a good point, but let's talk about these guys over here all the way on the extreme that are it's just psychos. I'm like, well, of course you're going to have a really bad conversation at that point. That's my view of it.
No, I completely agree. Like, if you look at it from the other lens, you know, I like people on the right, like they don't even go as like they pick some actual crazy person, you know. They'll just pick like one thing somebody like Kamala Harris, the transgender prisoners thing. That's based off like a CNN like little scratch poll survey that they do. Like, you know, and like that doesn't characterize like what she thinks, you know, and people are like, oh, radical leftist, and it's like Kamala Harris is like so pro business and so like pro corporations, dude. This is not some radical leftist, you know. And I think it's the same argument, you know. We should be having a conversation about Kamala Harris's actual policy agenda, not whether she's a part of the woke mob or not, you know? Like, that's ineffective.
No, I agree. It is really ineffective. But I think it leads to speaking past each other. Because, to be quite honest, if I'm arguing, for example, I don't believe this, but let's say Kamala is part of the woke mob trademark. She is like... Hypothetically, I were to believe that she's part of the woke mob agenda, right? And you didn't. And all I were to say was she wants transgender affirming care for illegals in prison. And that's all I just spouted every day, no matter what. And that was like my red line. I'm like, no, she's a bad person, right? And you're like, that's not even like representative who she really is. That's like not like we're not gonna have a conversation because I'm just gonna keep pointing out like extreme point. They're gonna be like, no. Yeah. And you could do the same for Trump as well in a lot of different ways. And it's just because obviously you don't support someone you think is like a radical psycho extremist. But if the other person's charged, they are a radical psycho extremist, there's not going to be a lot of process done. You know progress, but you know where progress can be found? You know, regardless of whether I think she's an extremist or not, I think that this policy here is damaging to the country. And we could actually talk about it in what do you call it? Nuanced, but also tangible way. Where we can both agree. Because every policy will objectively have outcomes. And we could objectively argue what the outcomes could be. We can't objectively argue whether or not she's a woke, mobster.
mob participant.
Yeah,
yes,
put it that way.
of course. It's like hard. I'm like clearly not in MAGA world enough like to get my vernacular all right about this stuff. You know, I feel like I've gotten a little more outdated as like the time's gone on. Like when I used to be like hyper online, I used to like, you know.
Doesn't it feel better though being like not hyper online anymore?
Oh yes, much
happier.
Well, yes, much happier. Like yeah. And I think, like, I don't agree with some of Kamala Harris's policies, you know, and I think we've actually personally had conversations about those policies we don't agree on, you know? And again, it comes back to, like, the simple point of, like, humanizing people. I think that's, like, the first most basic step, you know? You have to, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump do this stuff because it's their job, people. Like, that's it, you know? Like, these aren't, like, some like, yeah, they're passionate. Some of them might be crazy, but they're not, like, you know, they're not as evil as what the other side says they are. They're probably somewhere in the middle is where the truth lies.
Right, I agree. I think there are very few people in this world who actively wake up and everybody's like, how can I make the world worse to better myself? I think there are very few people that are actually like that.
I would hope.
I believe it. Do they flock to politics more often than not? Yes, but
yeah, like all the GW kids I know who are actually do the exact opposite of that does make me kind of question the like typical trend of no, people are morally good and not self-centered. Exactly.
Well, I think it's like the Plato's like those who want to like achieve power don't deserve power. Like, or should not have power. It's like because it's like it attracts the people who I think for every good person who wants to go into politics, there's a lot of bad people who want it just for like the clout or the power, just like for their own gain. And GW being a very political school, I mean, okay, well, this is going to become a bit of a slander on the student body at GW, but it's very
I don't
warranted.
believe anybody from GW should be elected a federal, local, or state office ever. These people are genuinely insane. That's
Miles,
my take.
30 years from now, when you're like running for some office, going to use that against you.
Yeah.
He doesn't believe in himself.
Clip monkey me right now. Clip it.
You're
Come
cook
on,
pal.
guys.
You're cook pal.
In my, deep political career, because, this is what I want to do with my life.
No, but there's something to be said about something that I find super heinous. And this is, a bit of a derailment, but I think this is a good conversation about the greater scope of what politics has become nowadays.
Yeah.
When you have these kids coming to college now and they put on this mask, they're not genuine kids. They're already acting like politicians. They already got their grand 4-year plan and beyond of what they're going to do outside of college. They're going to run for this position, run for that. And you're already talking to a politician, basically, a natural-born politician. And I don't get how they come to be. Because when I was in high school, I was a dumbass. Like, I wasn't thinking about this stuff.
Likewise.
Yeah, exactly. We were dumbasses. We were actually living our lives as kids, And then there's these...
We're just not ambitious enough. We didn't grind hard enough. We didn't have the foresight to become successful.
If that's success, what they're doing, I don't want it.
Agreed, dude. That's the one thing I've come to learn is that my quality of life is far more important than my career success will ever be.
Yeah, well, and it's just like, it's what kind of success do you want? Is the kind of success you want is like living this life where you can never let your guard down. You always have to have your guard up. You always have to put on like a face and pretend that you're this really clean, sanitized individual. Like, if that's the life you want to live and you think that's winning, I mean, pursue it to your heart's content, but I find that deplorable.
Actually advise do not pursue that. Please stop, go to church, go outside, reconsider your priorities in life, and go back to the drawing board.
Him saying you need to go to church really says a lot about how bad this issue is to him.
Hey, I go to church on Easter and Christmas, man. Like, I'm a good Christian. I do. It's
Really?
true. I'll send you the selfies this Christmas. I'll send you the selfies.
I better get an Easter selfie in church.
I'll send you those messages you send to like sorority girls like, oh, we're having I'll send like that. Oh my God, Ray, this is what I learned at church today.
Lovely gentlemen of Delta Tau Delta, I am at church right now praying to God.
Hey, I also my keychain, which is currently lost, but I now have a Pope pendant on it, straight from Italy. So I've upped my religiosity.
You're not even Catholic though.
My grandma's Catholic. It's cultural. But yeah, so now I'm like actually blessed, Ray. Anyway, I don't know how we got here. But
Mass democracy and its consequences. What? But going back to the original conversation, this I think is a greater cultural issue more than just the politicians, because it's not like the politicians come out of nowhere. For example, whether or not you think of Trump, he's a very unique and different politician. He's a paradigm shift of what politics is. He didn't come out of a vacuum. He came out because the social conditions, the cultural conditions were right. And now we're living in a Trump era, in a couple of years, maybe post-Trump era, and it'll be fundamentally different than the pre-Trump era. And we can't just blame Trump for the changes or attribute Trump to the changes. He would not have made it if he just ran 8 years earlier, I think.
Well, I think Trump, honestly, like, is not like the reason why our society is polarized.
I think he's a catalyst.
Oh no, I think it's all Newt Gingrich, bro, and just like like podcasting, any form of like humans being able to yell for like multiple hours, and the fact that for some reason, well, I actually listen to a lot of this stuff, but and people like decide to spend hours of their life hearing another person be angry about another person, you know, like think about that if there wasn't like so much power involved. Like I'm yelling about how bad like I think of like the person 3 people away from me life is. Like that would you would be like, this is idiotic, dude. This has nothing to do with you. Like please move on. Cuz it's not like these people are like experts, you know? Look at the Joe Rogan, look at the Call Her Daddies of the world, you know, all these podcasting that bring on these people. Dude, like, they're just talking to vacuums, dude. It's like everybody's talking to their own little fan base and nobody wants to, like, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I think there was I have a professor at university, and he was talking to me about kind of the difference of how things has become. And it's also the matter of, I think, people only watch clips nowadays. Like, it's a lot of people don't actually listen to a full thing anymore. Like, I'll guarantee you this. Joe Rogan had Trump on a few days ago. Might have been like literally 1 day ago, 2 days ago. I watched like 80% of it. Really interesting stuff. You know, regardless of what you think, it's interesting. Very interesting. For like a full 3 hours, you get to hear Donald Trump just talk. It's amazing.
Very interesting.
It's amazing, actually. I guarantee you 80% of the people that will talk about it will not watch it. They'll just see like 2 or 3 clips where Trump says like a little bit more like on the edge. And I mean, Trump even mentions like they're gonna take this out of context and say that I said this. Like he says like a few times during the podcast. And my professor was likening that back to speeches that the presidents used to give. And he said that for most of American history, what the newspapers would do was on the front page of a lot of these newspapers, they would print the entire speech of the president. Whenever the president gave a speech, the entire speech would be on the front page. So if you wanted to read it, you could get the whole context of the speech. Nowadays, if you want to listen to a speech of a president, you just go to Forbes and you watch a 2 to 3 second clip where he's, you know, he calls out this guy or he roasts the liberals, and then like these 3 second clips where like then there's like an applaud, you know? And because of that, very clearly, 1, you get things out of context. 2, you only see what they want you to see, because that's the only thing you represent. And if you really want to see the entire thing, you got to work to see it now. And 3, it's all, and I'll just restate this point. It's what the newspapers choose and pick as important. It's what the news media deems as a cut-worthy moment, and it can be very misconstrued.
Yes, that is an argument. The way you frame that, yes, but also on the other end, like they're cutting it because they know that's what people are gonna watch. You know, like. That's the thing. Like, they're a business. They need clicks. They need money, just like us. You know. That's why I'm on the podcast. You know, this is the content, guys. But no, like, think about it. Like, they're choosing this because they know this is what's gonna make them money. Like, yes, Donald Trump saying some crazy stuff, it will make them money. Kamala Harris doing a little dance with Beyonce, gonna make some money. You know, it's all about that bag. But no, I think. like you talk about like watching the whole like speech, you know, I've actually heard a lot of Democrat Twitter pundits saying like, oh no, like you should watch the whole like Trump speech, you know, and I agree with it. I have watched them. Definitely informed my opinion a lot, you know, like it was definitely changed me. And I think same with Harris, you know, look at any person and look at a full body of work. Look at how they set up their arguments, how they attack their arguments, and then look at the facts that they use to back it up.
I agree. To your point about what makes profit, or you know what will get the clicks, that is a tough part about the media. But at the same time, our news media system has always been for profit, but there was clearly a time when it was different, and it's devolved recently.
Well, didn't the news media though, like at least like TV news, like didn't it used to get like subsidized by the U.S. government?
I think there was something like that or I know there was regulations, I think at the beginning where it was like news, when there was like the big six or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like you have to have 15 to 30 minutes of allocated news time, and then it kept going on. I think CNN was the first one that had like 24-hour news coverage. Yep. I don't know if it was subsidized per se, but I know it was more regulated than it is now in terms of exactly the extent. And there's even a clause, I think, in the FCC or whatever, where it's like there is an objectivity clause that's just never been invoked in years. I don't know about the funding portion. It's very possible. But I think the understanding was before then, the news, like ABC, for example, they would have their shows and programming, and then that 30-minute or like news hour, it wasn't necessarily for profit. It was just their obligation that they had to do. So because of that, it shaped a lot of the way that they informed the news. But, I mean, even before then, I give the example of the newspapers. The newspapers have very limited space back in the olden days of what they can print on their papers, you know? Very limited space. You can only have so many pages in the newspaper. And yet they would choose to have the entire speech on the entire front cover rather than have clips of it and be like, well, I'm not taking an absurd one because this is just the further, you know, Lincoln venerates Confederates or whatever in Gettysburg speech. You know, you could like make the argument like if you want to like flip it in some crazy way, you know, Lincoln talks like good of the Confederates down south and blah blah blah. You know,
this is definitely a conversation. These are definitely quotes you're saying. But continue.
You get the point. But rather than do that, they would just say like Lincoln speaks at Gettysburg, and then the entire speech, and that would take up the front page or a sizable chunk of it. You know, and because I think this is the issue, there is a hunger for objective coverage, and there's a hunger for fair and reasonable conversation and analysis of that coverage, and we've kind of forgotten that. We pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, like you look at young people and the prevalence of like, you know, the apps that'll like determine like if the left, right, or like neutral, how many outlets like cover certain topics. I think that's an actual perfect example of that, you know?
Yeah. You talked about news coverage, ground news. Yeah. No, so, I mean, I follow ground news. I'm a big ground news enjoyer. Not sponsored, by the way. Maybe
Not sponsored.
You know, I mean, ground
Reach
news.
out.
Yeah. We kind of doing, you know, the mission statements kind of collide in some ways.
They do. We could actually be like the podcasting branch of ground news, you know. Just let us know.
Yeah. And it's really interesting when you look at some of these articles or some of like the ground news posts, and it's like blind spot for the right or blind spot for the left, and it's like there's like 3%, 4%, or even sometimes 0% coverage from one side. I'm just like, for some of these like pretty partisan news sources, I'm like, how do you at least not tackle it or address? You just completely ignore it and leave it out of your newspapers, or not newspapers, this is the modern era, but
Yeah. TikTok posts.
Right. And to me, I think that's really jarring and indicative of, you know, you talk about the news media companies like wanting to, you know what drives clicks, what drives stuff like that. But also I think there's the other side of it where some companies know our fan base, our readership is, let's say, left. And if we publish an article that might be harmful or counter to the thoughts of the left, our fan base might get upset or angry because people want their echo chamber.
Yeah. Like, everything we're saying is true, don't get me wrong. But I think the counter side to this is that as a journalist, you know, as a net editor, You have a responsibility to basically determine how you want to convey information and how you think that information and even the way you lay out the front page, like you're saying, has an immense amount of impacts, you know? And not covering or covering a story, like that's the thing. These places have finite resources, you know? So I think, well, yes, there's definitely the element of, oh, we just want to keep our fans happy, you know. There's also the element of they have beliefs, you know. They, as an institution, have deemed some things to be important topics, you know. Like, look at the Washington Post. The Washington Post has done the most, like, in-depth coverage of January 6th out of any other paper, you know, because it's happened in Washington, D.C., you know. They have the resources and time to contact the actual individuals involved in terms of, like, on the local scene, you know. It made a lot of sense, you know. Whereas the New York Times, I don't think has, like, yeah, they covered Jan 6, but it wasn't, like, you know, mass coverage, you know. So I think we also, like, I agree with you. It's about, like, yes, they at times unfairly manipulate the way they explain stuff in order to benefit their sides, but also it only makes sense in a good faith argument that we give them the chance to also just be good journalists trying to pursue things, and it's only this bad because of the split in the parties, you know, because of the polarization of our society that they are both affected by and compound.
Well, I mean, I think it's natural that, like, the Washington Post would cover more something that's more local to the area than the New York Times. Yes, I'd agree with that. That's not necessarily, I think, the issue. I think the issue comes from, like, purposefully blacklisting certain topics or certain subjects.
Could I get an example, if you have one off the top of your mind? Just curious.
Yeah, I'll give a historical one. I'll give a more recent one.
Yeah.
Like, historically, Sinclair Lewis, I think he wrote The Jungle, right? He wrote about, like, the food manufacturing, like, plants and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He wrote in a like, prominent left-wing magazine for a long time.
Damn right.
Yeah. And he wanted to write an article about one of the candidates who was, like, more left-leaning and socialist, but he actually took a lot of issues with him. I forget which candidate it was. I have a really hard time remembering which candidate's what, unfortunately. But Sinclair
Only care
Lewis,
about winners.
well, losers mainly. You know, it's the losers I don't remember because he was a, you know. But Sinclair Lewis had an issue with one of the candidates who was a rather liberal, and he wanted to write an article in the newspaper or in the magazine, kind of highlighting some of the problems and issues with the candidate. But as I mentioned before, this was a very liberal, like left-leaning magazine for the day. And in his personal letters, which became public, you know, after he passed away and such, he was writing to his friends that he's like, I want to cover this and I want to talk about the candidate in this way, but I'm afraid it's going to deter and anger the readership. And because of that, I won't do it. And he never ended up writing an article against the candidate. And I think this is a pressing issue that's been around forever, basically. And it goes from big to small, especially, like, smaller publications like this. We are a lot more beholden to a small fan base. And because of that, we're a lot more easily to sway and kind of kowtow to them.
Totally.
Bigger publications can afford to post more what they want because they have, you know, presence. Giving a modern day example off the dome, I would say an example would be I don't want to pick one that's, like, really, like, partisan.
Like, you
but I feel like that's the
totally
nature of it.
can. I really don't care, to be honest.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
We can talk about it and agree on things and disagree on things.
True.
Civilly.
True. I'm trying to think of a good example. I'll give this example of just, like, less so partisan, but just, like, one side just, like, trumpeting it out, the other side choosing not to. I'll give this example of when AOC went to the border and did that photo shoot at the border where she looked like she was like going to cry and looked really disappointed. Do you remember that?
No, this may be only a certain. Which blind side was this for?
It was a left blind side because basically she went to.
That makes sense.
Yes. Okay. Proof. This is proof. She went down to the border and she did like a photo shoot, and she was heavily criticized for just going down there, taking some photos, looking like she was really there for the people, and then she like kind of left.
Okay. That is wow. I fundamentally disagree with a lot in that argument, but continue.
What do you mean?
Well, isn't anytime anybody ever goes to the border, like, yeah, unless you're getting a photo of her writing, telling one of her legislative aides to write some legislation on the border, when is any politician going to the border actually doing something on the border?
No, I agree with that, to be honest with you. But it's the framing that Ocasio-Cortez put it, and then the clear this is just politician stuff, but it's funny because it's her. She goes there, and I still remember the photos in my head of her looking like real, like, sour powder, like sour faced and like looking like, wow, completely disingenuous in my opinion, completely disingenuous. But that's the nature of all politicians. Let's be real. But the idea, the concept of that one side completely pounced on it, and the other side just know nothing about it at all. Not even saying that she did go down there for a photo shoot because there's not so much
going down there for a trip to the border. I think would be
sure. See, that's how some would frame it.
Yeah, like imagine if Trump's doing another photo shoot at the border, guys, in front of his wall.
Yeah,
that's literally what Donald Trump does. I think
his wall.
Yeah, his wall that Mexico will pay for. Yep. Border politics, fun times.
Yeah, that and Hunter Biden's laptop. Yeah, but no. in all realness, I felt the urge to say that. In all, but yeah, no. In all fairness, the current state of conversation I don't think is that great in America, and it's partially our fault, like our own faults as citizens, as people. Partially the fault of the media and what we've been fed. But it's our job at the end of the day to do better. If the media isn't really providing what we need and giving a good example, we need to be our own good example. We need to be able to rise above it. To not do so, I think, would be a great disservice to this country, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, and then some more individual language, I'd say, not focused on the sanctity of our republic. Like, dude, take some responsibility for your life. Like, go have a conversation. Stop being a loser. Stop watching Twitch streams. Go outside, touch grass. Like, have a conversations with that dude who definitely doesn't agree with you. Have a conversation with a woman. That's good. Like, come on, guys. Like,
okay, let's try. That's small baby steps. Let's not go like right away.
Yeah.
That's a little tough one. Yeah. That's like a 201 trick. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Step 1. Wash your clothes. Step 2, go outside. Step 3, delete your Twitch Premium subscription. That's all you got to do, guys. Freedom, intellectual freedom awaits.
Yeah, intellectual freedom is literally just going outside on a regular basis. You're going to achieve it.
I've been doing that, dude. I feel much more free.
It's true. And also, if you're just parroting the views of someone else and you have no nuance or disagreements with them, I think that begets you having to reflect on yourself. Are these even your views, or are these just the views of someone you watch and you just like the person, so because of that you're just taking all their views?
Yeah. Every time I've had a job interview with a political organization, like for a job, they've asked me, what opinions do you disagree with from the main party line? Like, people who work in politics even are looking for this stuff. They're looking for nuance. They're looking for critical thinking skills, and that's our humble plea.
Yes. And on that note, we thank you for listening to another episode of the Platoon Podcast. I'm Raymond Hennessy. This has been Miles Moorfield. Thank you. This episode was made possible by our producer, Miles Moorfield, our researchers, Trex Jones and Michael Schur. This episode was also made possible by the Ox Institute. For more information to keep up with them, follow them at oxinstitute.org. Thank you.